and welcome back to the show. 35,000 people are on parole in New York City, and they are all daily subjects to reincarceration for technical violations. African Americans are reincarcerated for technical parole violations 12 times the rate as their white counterparts. And African Americans statewide are 5 times more likely to receive a technical parole violation. Now, the Less is More Coalition is urging Governor Andrew Cuomo to sign the Less is More Act immediately to bring transformative parole reform to New York. Joining us to share is the Katal Center for Equity, Health, and Justice's member, Avion Gordon. And Avion, good to have you.
Good to be here.
Good to have you for this conversation. And I guess when we talk about this here and we look at, as I said in the intro, there's a disparity when it comes to these technicalities and these violations, particularly for those in communities of color. When we look at what we see is by way of reform, and we look at what these parole actually doing, talk to us a little bit about what this means to you by way of how these parole violations really impact people's lives.
So in my case, I'm on parole. I've been on parole for about a year, almost coming up on 1 year anniversary mark. And parole can be very destructive to people and their families, right? It can be destructive because we are under these curfews. We're under this constant fear that we can be reincarcerated for something as small as a technical parole violation, something as small as a missing an appointment with your parole officer, something as small as missing, testing positive for alcohol or any type of substance. So people on parole live under the umbrella or blanket of this ongoing fear that, hey, you could do something small as knowing someone else on parole or knowing someone else with a criminal history and be reincarcerated for that. So it's very fearful.
Yeah. And so we're talking about the Less is More Act, right? And so when we talk about this legislation and reform, talk to us about what you want to see happen.
So I would like to see, so the legislator passed this bill in the last session, June 10th. And I would like to see Governor Cuomo sign this bill immediately, but not only immediately, I would like him to implement it immediately or put it in effect earlier than the March 2022 date. But that's what I would like to see.
Yeah. And when we look at this here right now, and we look at how parole is really impacting the lives of so many people, give us your experience, because you touched upon something a little bit earlier when you said, when you're on parole, here you are and you're walking around with this fear. And do you walk around with that kind of fear on a daily basis?
I do work around with this fear on a daily basis. So a little bit about myself. My name is Avion Gordon. I was wrongfully incarcerated in 2018. That case has been dismissed in the interest of justice. And currently I have 1983 civil action lawsuit against my county. So I live under this constant fear because I reside in the county that I am on parole. And things as small as things as small as driving was an issue, or being around certain people is the issue, because technically anything can happen. We know that people of color are more likely to be stopped by police officers. We know that people of color may be racially profiled. So yeah, it's a constant fear, something that I feel like I have to walk on eggshells or tread lightly around, because anything could happen and I could be reincarcerated, and not only reincarcerated, I could spend a long time in prison because of this.
Right. And so for you, as you said, you had your, you pretty much are at the place right now where you're on parole, and that has gone away. But talk to us about the criminal justice system, because going through the system, being a part of going through that system, give us from an inside perspective to an outsider, what is that really like, particularly when you look there and you find predominantly people of color?
Yeah, so I could tell you a story about someone who I known in the past that was reincarcerated for a technical parole violation, because that's what Less is More is about. Less is More is about technical parole violations. I was incarcerated when I met my first example of a person incarcerated for a technical parole violation, and he spent months in jail only to find out that he wasn't supposed to be there. So this man lost his job, his family, his housing, everything was disrupted. And then it was later deemed to be he was there. He wasn't even supposed to be there. It was a mistake or a administrative misjudgment on behalf of the parole officer. And I like to tell the story because this individual is actually incarcerated for having a sheetrock knife, a knife intended for use at his job. His life was turned upside down because of something he needed to make a living. So it's just crazy what we have to face on a constant daily basis with this.
Right. And so the reform is important, and really getting the word out. Do you feel as though a lot of the public knows about this and the need for this kind of reform?
So yeah, so we have been doing an amazing job at Katal Center. We've been flying, we've been holding these rallies, we've been hosting these community sessions, these info sessions, these town halls. We've been really at the forefront of informing people, the general population, of what these individuals go through. Because you are going to know, especially in the Black community, because as spoke about earlier, there are racial disparities, right? Black people are 12 times more likely to be incarcerated for these violations than a person not of color, a white person. So you are going to know, like, a lot of people in our community or in the Black community that will know someone that's on parole, but they don't know the actual like details behind it. They don't know exactly what we go through. You don't know like the fear. They don't know like the trauma this causes to not only the individual on parole, but also their family.
Right. And you talked about that, not just the individual, but the family. What's it like for, if you don't mind being personal, your family, knowing that, you walk around daily and there's this potential that, hey, you can go to the store and something could happen. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, you're right back where you came from.
So I like to say that it's not only me on parole and my family's on parole, because I live with my family, and at any given time in the past, the parole officer could come in and say, hey, like, we need to express things. We need to see what's going on. So you put my family, my elderly parents, at a risk for coronavirus, COVID, right? It's the time of COVID, they got to come in, they got to check things out. And you're talking about elderly people, unvaccinated at a time, that may be exposed to someone going around to multiple different houses, exposed to multiple different situations. My family could be exposed to something like that. Also, my children, there's been numerous times where my son, he has football practice, he has a football game, and he's like, Daddy, can you come? And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to try to be there. He's like, try? What do you mean try? I'm like, well, I have to get the approval from my parole officer. And there's many times where, because of another thing I like to talk about, because of their workload, their caseload, there's so many people on parole that he hasn't got back to me. I've missed important dates. I've missed important sessions with my family, my sons, my daughter. It's just, there needs to be a complete revamp of the system. And that's why less is more is so important. We're changing the way how the system works. We're changing the way how things work to make it fair and balanced for everyone, for people on parole. And these are good people. I'm not a bad person. This is someone who was, one, remember, like I said, wrongfully incarcerated for a crime that was deemed dismissed in the interest of justice. So not everyone you see is bad, but we have this just like a bad connotation, or a bad we're contextualized in this box that everyone on parole is a criminal or a bad person, or they're gonna go do something. No. These are good people that just wants to be there for their family, their community, and make an impact on the people's lives that touch them.
Right. I think you touched upon something a little earlier that I want to expound upon, and that's the whole issue of due process, right? Because you can be in that process. You talked about parole officers being overloaded, that you can't even get to a place where I get a response back. So what's it like, and what would you like to see in the area of due process for those on parole?
So that's the main component of less is more, bolstering due process. The Less is More Act, when Governor Cuomo signs this into law, provides a speedy hearings. All right. People who are detained, right? If they're detained, their hearings are required to be completed within 35 days. And for people who are at liberty, because remember, this law, some people will be at liberty. They won't be automatically incarcerated. So people at liberty, those hearings must be completed within 55 days, which is a huge contrast to right now, the 105 days. Like you said, the person had known, he spent months in jail only to find out, hey, I didn't do anything wrong, and now I can go back after he lost his job, his housing, and his family. So there are other things though, but like with due process. So right now, with this law, all hearings would be required to be held in the community instead of being held inside jails. That does massive things for the psychology behind people going in front of these boards for this hearing, right? It improves transparency, and it allows for witnesses and loved ones and the general public to access and be a part of these hearings, because we can see. It brings about transparency, which is what we need in this whole parole system. And it establishes the right to counsel. Now we have proper representation that we weren't having before. Now we have a lawyer, an attorney present that we didn't have the ability to have before. It just really makes things a lot more fair for everybody.
Yeah. Well, less is more is definitely out there. Hopefully the governor will have an opportunity to sign it and sign it soon. I know it would do well for parolees. I know it would do well for their families. And I think overall, it would do something in the area of communities of color where so many people have been impacted. Talk to me about that. When you see that number of so many of communities of color right behind bars, right on parole, for you, a person of color, what's that feeling like for you?
You know, it's you feel as if you're targeted. People of color have been targeted. We are targeted, and it's disheartening to know that as an individual, as a man, a Black man, that at any given time your life could be taken away from you, your livelihood, your job, your family could all be taken away from you. So it's very disheartening at that level.
Yeah. And so the Katal Center has been at the forefront of really making the voice heard. Talk to me about your work.
So yeah, so like I mentioned before, our work has been community involvement, informing the community, educating the community about people on parole, about parole reform, educating the communities about other states providing parole reform. You know, it's not just New York State that is on the forefront of parole reform. We have whopping legislation that we want to get signed, but there's been other states, Arizona comes to mind, that has been, working on parole reform.
Yeah. So for people who want to get connected to you guys and really support the work that you're doing, how can they be a voice and how can they be an advocate, given the fact that this is a major issue that needs to be dealt with?
So yeah, there's something we could do. You can visit actually www.lessismoreny.org. That's LESSISMORENY.org. And you can take the online action tool where you can contact Governor Cuomo and urge him to sign the bill, because that is really what we need. We need to urge him and let him know, like, look, we want you to sign this bill and we want you to actually implement it at an earlier date so that people on parole can have that incentive, that 30-day incentive to remember, 30-day incentive is every 30 day a person's on parole, they will actually get 30-day credit. So essentially their parole time will be cut in half.
Mhm. And that's major, and that's huge. What has it been like with elected officials? I mean, are they really supportive right now? How's it been with them?
Yeah, we have had support from district attorneys, Republican district attorneys, the legislature, the Senate. This bill wouldn't have gotten passed if we didn't have support. If the politicians didn't feel as if they owed their constituents to pass this bill, because that's what they want. You know, they support it, right? So this bill wouldn't have gotten passed if the people didn't demand it, and people are demanding. People are feeling the fear. People are feeling the disheartening terror that comes along with a person being on parole and their loved ones and their families and disrupting the communities. So yes, we have a lot of support.
Oh yeah, and I apologize. I didn't frame it right probably when I said about the support, because we do know it takes support in order for the bill to pass, right? But then when we're talking about where we are in this moment with, you're just on the brink of this thing could happen if the governor signs it, really keeping the governor at bay. I know he's got a lot of things to worry about right now, but yet and still really keeping him keeping his feet to the fire and making sure that the signature occurs.
Yeah, and that's a fact. Yeah, we want to urge Governor Cuomo. We want to let him know, like I support you, Governor Cuomo, to sign this bill, um, because it's going to impact people of New York. It's going to impact people on parole, people that need that freedom or that fair treatment in the parole justice system, criminal justice system with parole.
Yeah. And so for you, as we're talking about, your experience and going through it, what would you finally just want somebody to know before we close out?
I want people to know that we are advocating for technical parole violations that people can be reincarcerated for something as small as missing an appointment with your officer, something as small as missing curfew, something as small as being in the same room or knowing someone that is on parole or has a criminal background, right? So I just want people to know that this bill is advocating for technical parole reform for violations, things that could turn someone's life.
Well, Avion, I want to thank you for being with us here on the Social Justice Forum. Certainly, I think that it's important that we continue to keep this conversation flowing, and we'll continue to track and see as things get closer if the governor does sign it, and the many thousands of people that it will impact just by the stroke of a pen. So thank you so much for being a great voice and sharing your story with us too, and really bringing it home.
Pleasure to be here.
All right.